You are listening to Triple Take Cinema. I'm Alex Orlando, here with my two co-hosts, Dustin Zick and Kyle Brown. Kyle, you ready to talk movies today?
Yeah, I'm ready to talk movies. But can we do this episode with like a penetrating death metal vibe in the background that never stops and ceases, so that everyone's on edge the whole time?
I didn't know we were talking movies today. No, it's a really dumb joke.
I'm into that. We are specifically talking interesting uses of color in movies today. I am always drawn to movies that use color in intriguing, compelling ways, kind of where it's the definitive element that makes the movie for me. Before I get into the three that we are going to talk about, I wanted to rattle off some honorable mentions that we did not end up covering, just to give everyone an idea of the types of movies we're thinking about here. So these are some honorable mentions for movies that use colors in interesting ways that we did not pick for today's episode. They are In the Mood for Love by Wong Kar-wai, Hero with Jet Li, Sin City, Vertigo, the infamous Hitchcock Vertigo, Sean Baker's The Florida Project, and Tarsim's The Fall. But we're not talking about any of those today. We are talking about, first and foremost, Suspiria, the 1977 movie by Dario Argento, Ran, the 1985 movie by Akira Kurosawa, and 2019's Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And as we talk about with all these episodes, I had seen just one of these movies before this. Ran is a personal favorite of mine. It was one of my top 4 films on my Letterboxd for quite a while. Definitely in, if not my top 10, at least my top 20 movies of all time. And I wanted to pick 2 other movies that I had not seen to complement Ran for talking about color in film. So I went with Suspiria because I've seen the 2018 Luca Guadagnino remake and really dug it, but have not seen the original and heard that used color really interestingly. And I also picked Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which I have not seen. Been on my list for a while, know it got a lot of acclaim, and also heard that it uses color interestingly. And as we're talking today, I want us to talk about all the things that we found cool and fun about these flicks, but through the lens of color and just kind of how that informed our viewing. Dustin, maybe you can kick us off and talk about what your relationship is with these 3 films before watching them for today's ep.
Yeah, so I'd seen Suspiria at least 2 or 3 times, definitely 2 times in the theater. Including once in the
you saw that movie in the theater? You went into a theater and watched that? Holy
yes.
Go on.
Well, the first time I ever saw it was in the theater, and the oh god, I'm trying to scroll through the Wikipedia page because I'm forgetting the Goblin, the band that scored the movie. They were doing a live tour accompanying the movie in theaters. And so I saw it at Milwaukee's historic Oriental Theater, and in addition to the score being there, I vividly remember walking through in the Oriental. If you've never been, it's this grand theater and historic, very decorated, ornate, and you walk through this kind of. There's 3 screens. There used to be only 1 screen, and then they kind of like segmented off 2 little kind of mini rooms off of the main screen. This was on the main screen, and you walk down this kind of long hallway, and above you, there's a balcony up there, and at the top of the archway of the hallway, which is maybe about 1.5, 2 stories, they had a mannequin hanging from, like in the movie, like the girl, the first murder, hanging through the ceiling, in a dress, hanging from like a noose, and that kind of just set the bar for me. I'd been familiar with some of Argento's other work. I think he did Demons, but I might be wrong about that. But it's definitely in the same, Italian horror kind of vein. I known kind of what to expect from Italian 70s horror, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So I was very familiar with Suspiria. Go ahead.
Was the ticket to get into that you personally sacrificing a goat? Was that the ticket?
No, it wasn't. No. Fortunately, it was not.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
I had never heard of, how do you pronounce it? Ron. I had never ever seen or heard of it. I was vaguely familiar with Kurosaka's name, but I, honestly,
Kurosawa.
like Kurosawa's name. Case in point.
Vaguely, the
I was like,
word
I
there.
can't let that go.
Yeah. But like Japanese cinema in general, outside of some Japanese horror from the 90s and 2000s, was a big blind spot for me. And then Portrait of a Lady on Fire, I remember hearing about when it came out, but really had no concept of the story or anything like that. Kyle, how about you?
Well, as previously mentioned with my relationship to horror, no, Suspiria was something that had thankfully never been put in front of me, because I had never heard of this movie. I had not heard of the remake. Maybe it's just the Google algorithm just only feeding me non-horror films after learning my every whim and desire over the last 15 years or whatever. But anyway, I had no concept of this. And then I tried to I read a couple taglines before I watched it, just to be like, oh, okay. And then the first 15 minutes of the movie happened, and I was just like, I'm gonna kick the shit out of Alex. I tried initially. Well, I'm like a babe in the woods. I started watching that movie at like 11:30 at night after watching a very exciting hockey game. And that was not the move. So I had to table that for a time and come back to it when the sun was out, and shining brightly on every nook and cranny of the room I was in. Anyway, so I had not seen that or heard of that or anything like that. I definitely I'd watched Ron a couple times when I was younger. I mean, I I went through a big Kurosawa phase when I started to get into film and watched a bunch of his stuff. And it was one that we'll get into it, but like that was the most interesting rewatch of all of these because, well, the only rewatch, and therefore the most interesting. But it just was much different than what I remembered it to be in good and bad ways for me. And Portrait of a Lady on Fire I hadn't really heard of. I kind of had heard of it because the title is good, and so it's just kind of this thing you hear once, and it kind of you know what I mean. Like it just kind of like when you put that down, I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of that. But then I started to look at it and research it and see where I could watch it, all that stuff. And I was like, I haven't heard of this. How have I heard of this? And that was it's the kind of movie that I watched, and I started to try to figure out what else that director had done. So two big blind spots for me when it comes to this, and then I hadn't watched Ron in 10, 12 years. So it was good to check it out again. And just to dive right into like general color thoughts. It was an interesting way to try to watch movies with that. It's much different than being like, what does this director do? What is this? It's a very, or like, how is sound used? It's a very different way to look at movies through this lens of how color is used. To try, I guess I found it to be, it heightened me in a way to several scenes that I appreciated. And it's good. I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but wasn't Ron Kurosawa's first foray into color?
I think it was, yeah. I might be wrong on that too, but I think it was, and it's interesting because I was reading that Kurosawa trained as a painter before, either before becoming a director or before shooting Ron. And yeah, he definitely composes the images with that kind of painterly eye. I think it's kind of cool about all three of these movies is that, um, Suspiria to varying degrees, but definitely Ron and Portrait of a Lady on Fire. You could pause that at any point in those two movies, potentially any three of these movies, put a frame around it, and it would be a damn good painting, just because of how they compose the images. Um,
Yeah,
and
I really felt that way about Portrait of a Lady on Fire, which was sweet because the actual like painting was pretty intimate in that, and yeah, the amount of times that I was just struck by composition of what I was seeing and how it related to what the plot was, masterwork stuff.
yeah, and maybe we can torture you a little bit, Kyle, and start with Suspiria and do things chronologically here. Um, and thinking about color and Suspiria, and also thinking about not gelling with a movie like that. I was talking to Dustin the other week, and I was sharing that I watched Suspiria in two viewings, where I watched about half an hour of it, and then picked up and watched the last hour. And it wasn't until the beginning of that second viewing that the movie really clicked for me. And it was in a scene that used color in probably the most striking way that we had seen up to that point. It was about a third of the way into the movie where the premise of Suspiria is that it is an all girls ballet school, and it is essentially, spoiler, a coven of witches. And in one of these early scenes, the the girls are all kind of sleeping communally in a shared space, and there are these curtains that are drawn around where the girls are sleeping, and there's this like ghoulish, just ghastly red that is coating every inch of the frame, and you've got that like thrumming goblin score that's just eerie and creepy as hell. You've got these silhouettes cast over like the bed sheets essentially that are surrounding the girls, um, and just that ghoulish red, and the sound design, and kind of the narrative, which is we're starting to see the sinister things happening at this ballet school. It all clicked for me. And before that, where I thought the movie was pretty awkward and kind of stilted and was kind of lurching from dialogue scene to dialogue scene, that was where the color theory and the sound design and the plot all gelled, and I was hooked from that point on.
Yeah, I mean, I there's it almost was, well, maybe want to chain smoke cigarettes for one. For two, it I kind of liked the way it started and the way that it set the scene, and just immediately, like when when we're talking about how is color being used, and this is something that's used in a million movies, but like she shows up in an all white dress, I was like, okay, yeah, I bet that's gonna get ruined very quickly, and then it just blasted off into this psychosis of crazy color and crazy gore, and
Psychedelic is the word that comes to mind for me.
yeah, I mean, if you're having a very bad trip, I agree. I definitely agree. But the trying to try, I did try to look up some critical response to this, because it's always interesting when something has this place in film history, and a lot. Obviously, it's got some polarizing views from when it came out to now. And I think the best description that I read, that I think I agree with in terms of how the movie made me feel, and the over the top use of color and just interesting shots and just crazy pacing and crazy sound, is like that it's a nightmare. Is that it's a nightmare on screen, and kind of that herky jerky nature of it. That all tracks with me, and that's kind of the way that I can give it credit, I guess, in terms of why was this made. You know what I mean? Or like what is it about this that made Argento want to make this? Where was the hook for him, other than in people. And I I don't. It's such an abrupt beginning with some of the gore, and it's very affecting. And I tend to not actually be affected by gore. I think the sound on top, and the color and the composition of stuff, and how quickly things moved, really unnerved me in a way that was not comfortable. And so it accomplished a lot of its goals. You know what I mean? Whether or not I don't think I could watch this in the theater. I do not think that would be something that I could do and be okay for like a couple weeks after. And so in a lot of ways, there was something about that beginning scene as well, where the stabbings are extremely. Have you seen? You've both seen Jake Gyllenhaal, Killer, Hunting Down.
No,
not Nightcrawler. God, it's
Jake
killing
Gyllenhaal,
me.
Killer. He's the killer?
No, he's not the killer. He's
it's with Hugh Jackman.
No,
with
no. That's you're thinking of Prisoners. Oh my sweet Lord, Zodiac. Zodiac.
Oh, yeah, Zodiac. Okay, yeah, like the scene at the park with the couple.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see the line you're making, where like both of those stabbings feel so visceral, where like you feel the knife going in as a viewer.
Yes.
It's just
and that like as soon as that was happening, it put me in a different mindset. But I also it was almost just too much of that. Like it was too much pedal on the metal for me to not allow my senses to kind of reset. You think of that scene in Zodiac, and Zodiac's got some gore in it for sure, but it has all these moments of calm in between, and so those moments get really heightened. Like when she gets stabbed in Zodiac, it's very jarring, and it comes almost out of nowhere, and there's just this chaotic rhythm to Suspiria. That was hard for me to, again, made me want to chain smoke cigarettes. I just wanted. It was just like this is never letting up, and in that sense, psychedelic is good because you're on this ride.
Right.
I didn't feel that some of that gore. I don't know. You have to kind of give yourself over to it in a lot of ways, because it didn't feel like super justified. Like I did think there was some thinness of the plot, and it was hard to really grasp onto stuff. But it was an overwhelming film experience for sure. And so, like I said, in that way, a lot of the goals were accomplished. And I guess I'm just kind of interested to hear, how your experiences of this were. It's just
I'll say, like, I appreciate, like, this just underscores, like, I appreciate you, for lack of a better word, like, being vulnerable enough to, like, watch this stuff, like, for this, just because, as we've established, like, I'm a gore hound, a horror hound, and I think a lot of it comes from fascination with, like, how they do the effects, and like I like watching the behind the scenes stuff, so like I kind of unplug from the reality of it a little bit with that in mind. But then so I just want to say for one that I appreciate you watching these things that give you that kind of visceral reaction. I will say, like, I don't get that from horror that often anymore, and the few horror movies that have done that are ones that I certainly wouldn't recommend to you, but so like I'm almost a little jealous of that, but I also appreciate, to your point, of like, like this movie like performed its goals perfectly in what it's trying to accomplish. And sorry, muting so I don't cough into the microphone. I think it's interesting to hear you say that like it accomplished its goals as like kind of a horror movie, because for me it's like this movie does not, even the first time I saw it, like did not scare me. Like I do agree about the stabbing and the visceralness of this. Alex and I talked the day after I watched it, and I think I told him, I'm like, it reaffirmed my perspective that like I'd much rather be shot than stabbed if given the choice. Like stabbing to me feels like it's an intimate and like damaging, and I just feel like healing from a stabbing attack would be so much harder than being shot. And like this movie, like when I see that stabbing happen, like it almost kind of takes me out in terms of thinking if it like it feels, my gut instinct when I watch it is like, oh, this seems fake, because the blood, the color of the blood pops, which is part of, you know, the color. Like I love that. It's a very like 70s and early 80s horror movie thing where like I feel like they just couldn't get the color of blood quite right, and it looks almost comically red a lot of times. And you see that in movies like Evil Dead and whatnot, where it goes to the extreme. But I think it works to some effect in this, both with the mosaic of color going across like the rest of the movie, but then like even the motion of the stabbing feels so fake that it's almost, I'm almost like, I imagine this is probably what it really is. Like it's not like you hear a ton of noise when you're getting stabbed or something. Not to over gesticulate around the stabbing scene itself or anything, but that feels visceral. And for me, this movie is very much about like the sum of its parts making it as special as it is, because I think the acting is terrible. I think what you were talking about, Alex, with the dialogue feeling stilted, I feel that through the entire movie.
Right.
And that's some of that, you know, Italian foreign movie, American, you know, whatever dubbing, pseudo dubbing they did afterwards. A lot of that like just falls flat in terms of the execution. But like the two sensory things that you get are the color palette and the unique colors that oftentimes literally don't make any sense for like, why is this hallway green or whatever? Like, where's the lighting for this? But it exactly. Looks awesome. And then that's
very nightmarish. Yeah, very nightmarish. Yeah.
And then the soundtrack to this, I mean, honestly, I would just as easily put this in a you know, trio of movies with very affecting, specifically instrumental, like original scores. Like I feel like what Goblin did with the soundtrack and kind of layering it on this, like it would not have the same effect if it was any other music and any other instrumental music styled in a different way or anything. So for me, this movie is most enjoyable in that visually what you're experiencing and audially what you're hearing as far as the music goes, and in certain scenes the sound effects too and things like that. Like the story and the dialogue are kind of, I mean, like Witches doesn't do it for me. It's not something I don't feel like there's a ton of great witch, you know, horror movies out there in general, but I think that the other thing I want to underscore with this one, for me, thinking of all three of these, obviously when Alex, you said you wanted to do color, this being the one I've seen, I was like, oh yeah, of course, that makes perfect sense. But even coming out of all three, I definitely can see the importance and the use of color in Ron. I can see, like I saw it on the second half more than the first half of Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And I can appreciate it in those, but I feel like this is the one movie where if you mute the color palette or if you don't have as unique of a color palette, I don't think I would like this movie half as much as I do. I think it's visually so unique and so interesting. Whereas, not that the other two aren't, but there's enough other stuff going on with them that, like, right, my opinions of them, the weight of the color usage in it doesn't weigh as heavily as it does with this one. And maybe that's because in this one, I feel like the color is just like kind of a cool fucking thing and that nightmarish feeling compared to the other two where I think maybe color is more symbolic and more trying to
right. It's articulating themes that are the movie's underscoring, whereas here it's part of that audiovisual experience that you're talking about. It's part of getting you on board with that, you know, nightmarish, hallucinatory just vibe the movie's going for. I think about even that first scene when Susie is walking through the airport and the way the neon signs are like glowing around her is very, you know, surreal intentionally. And I agree, Dustin. I think this movie's, main triumphs are audiovisual. They are not, the complexity of its plot, which is pretty damn minimalist and simplistic. We get one exposition dump about 2/3 of the way through about, this old witch, Helenos Markos, being the source of the evil in this academy. And then we get to the end, and it turns out, yep, it's all her. She's the one giving the coven this power. So it's not like there's a complex plot. I do think there are some interesting themes happening here when it comes to, institutionalized societies for women, and the catty nature of some of those and the hierarchy. But all of that feels a little kind of cartoonish and one-dimensional, where it really is about providing this dreamscape for Argento to play with the color and the sounds. And I agree, Kyle, about that first kill, the stabbing, being really jarring. That was why I think I didn't like the movie initially. Was there wasn't a crescendo that let me build up to that first killing. It was just kind of like I got thrown right through that stained glass window along with that character, where I was trying to catch my bearings and be like, what the fuck is happening right now? And I think the other kills were more successful because there was a crescendo. There was an escalation of plot and narrative, where with, the guy getting attacked by the dog, where there was like a buildup of tension. I think, this is a movie that lives and dies, more so dies, on the strength of its kills. And I think that when that girl is trying to escape and falls into the barbed wire is the most effective, horror sequence in the movie, because there's such a clear buildup and such a, the way he wrings out the tension of, is she going to escape? The music stops and the camera's pointed up as she's climbing up the cabinets and into that room, and then she drops down and it reveals that she's in the barbed wire. That made my stomach sink, but in a really satisfying way, because I felt like I was along for the ride. Whereas with that first kill, I felt like I was just being thrown into it in a way that, was less engaging for me as a viewer. How does it resonate with you guys?
I just want to point out with the barbed wire scene, I've always felt like this is a good scene where I struggle to understand, and I feel like some movies do this better than other TV shows, of what is illuminated for us as an audience versus illuminated for a character. Am I able to see the shapes, and I mean specifically literally in this scene, am I able to see the barbed wire when she falls into it? It seems like it's pretty well lit. Am I just able to see it because her being in a pitch black room with barbed wire would not be visually interesting? There's nothing to show there. Or if you take it literally, I always thought it was kind of funny how she just didn't look down and jumped, and all of a sudden whoops, whole room full of barbed wire, and I just didn't realize that's what I was jumping into. And I think that the first time I saw it, I probably chuckled out loud of just the absurdity of it. And then the second time I saw it was when I was kind of wait a minute, am I is this illuminated just so I can see what's going on as part of the audience, and I'm supposed to suspend my disbelief that she can't see it because it's so dark? And that might be giving it more credit than it's due for the time it was made and things like that. I don't think, we kind of talked about, this movie and part of its era, and I may be totally off base by saying this, as much as I love movies like this, I'm not a true expert, but my understanding is that this was a slasher movie, or a Giallo, I don't know how you say it, Giallo, the Italian cinema genre of film, where it was kind of about the schlock and the gore and the scares, and less about the art kind of thing. But it kind of became about the art in general. I'm eating my words right now. So
I mean, I think what you say about build up in horror moments and the use of gore in build up, I think is important. And I know it's very important for me in my viewing of anything that involves like, and it's, I don't typically, and this is what was so, it was interesting to feel that way watching this, because I have taken efforts to desensitize myself to that so that I can watch more movies and all those things. And because it was just very quickly like, what the fuck is happening? And it doesn't have that the buildup was really just the sound and the weird cab ride, and like it was, it just was, it set you off kilter a little bit. And so the buildup wasn't story or plot, it was just this creation of suspense and tension through many means. To not have the buildup, that the scene, to go back to the stabbing, the scene in Zodiac that ends with that has this very long buildup to that, where you're just very concerned about what's going to happen, and then when it does, it happens in this way that's very procedural and cold, and it lasts with me in a different way than this type of presentation. But I agree with you with that scene, because I need that build up for it to really have the impact beyond just visual stimulation, I guess. To have sort of a totalistic feel of really being there with it, as opposed to more feeling like I'm watching a car accident and I can't look away type of thing. So yeah, I mean, that's yeah, I mean, again, this is I'm glad that this project that we have here exists, because it does put me in front of things that I just would have never come into contact with, and this is certainly one of them. Yeah, and I don't know anything about these Italian things that you're talking about with regard to this world and this time period and what was created and all that stuff, but it just, yeah, a movie that I would recommend to a very specific type of person, and also one I can definitely see as, very clearly generating a cult. Oh, they're playing this movie at 12 p.m. at the small theater, like all like that's, I can see it being almost Rocky Horror Picture Show style, where it's just, you want to go because it's an experience.
Yeah.
And not necessarily because you're going to, I don't know, think differently about something after it, I guess.
Yeah, that's like kind of an interest. Like I wholly agree, and it's kind of one where I'm like, I don't think just seeing it on a big screen by itself makes a big difference, but seeing it in an audio, I mean, you can just feel, like empath feel like from an audience that's very deliberately there and excited about something. And then also, like I said, seeing it with the live score from Goblin was incredible, and like that totally adds to it and like just creates a whole different vibe for sure.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good segue into talking about Ron, because I think one of the things that really elevated Ron for me is I saw it when I was younger, like you, Kyle. I think kind of in my early 20s, I was on the Kurosawa kick, and I was trying to see a lot of his movies, and I saw it then. But about 2 or 3 years ago, when I had first moved to Milwaukee, I also went to the Oriental Theater, where they were doing a showing of Ron, and seeing it on the big screen with a crowd full of people. It was selected as part of their staff picks, so there was someone who introduced the movie and talked about their love for it. And I do think there's a bump that you get from seeing any movie in a theater, but especially seeing it at, say a historic theater that is special to you and an important place that really, really elevates it. So I think seeing Ron at the Oriental really gave me that bump that elevated it in my mind, and it was a treat to revisit it for this episode and just kind of fall in love with it all over again. And I guess one way to kick us off would be talking about how color informed my viewing this time, which was that very first opening credits scene that we get, where we're seeing these lush landscapes in Japan, where um, the story's taking place, and we see all of the characters framed really small in the corner of the screen, and they've got these, these different primary colors that they're wearing. The three sons. The movie's about an aging warlord who is separating his dynasty among his three sons, and they're wearing red, yellow, and blue, kind of primary colors respectively. And I just remember being kind of awestruck at how the green landscape that Kurosawa is filming totally dwarfs the characters in these kind of, garish primary colors. And it almost made it seem kind of silly, the domestic squabble that we're going to see play out over the next 2 hours, which is going to result in many deaths and be, it's a tragedy. It's a Shakespearean tragedy. But I just love how he used color to kind of symbolically dwarf these characters and show that they are, insignificant when you look at, something like a green landscape or, the beauty of nature. And I just thought that was a fun way that color kind of informed my viewing. But would love to hear from you guys, how you reacted to this movie and how color kind of shaped your viewing of it.
And Dustin, you haven't seen this movie before, so I'm very curious as to your perspective, just your experience viewing it.
So I struggled with this. It took me about 4 days to watch it in full. I do feel like when it comes to color, the strongest connection I felt to that was that whole opening sequence with the green landscape, because I feel like the green landscape didn't make much of a return throughout the rest of the movie, and I'm sure that was kind of deliberate of the dirt and the gravel and that kind of stuff. So I remember going into it, it's been 2 weeks since I watched it now, of like thinking like, yeah, like this was gorgeous, like wow. The rest of it just like, I think I told Alex this, I got re-engaged with it at the point where the first brother dies, and then his wife kind of throws herself at the other brother. That whole sequence, I was like, "Ooh, okay, some drama going on." Like that got me like plugged back into it. Yeah, I don't know. There wasn't like a particular like one thing I can like key in on. Like I think I ended up giving this a 4 out of 5. Like I'm certainly glad I watched it. I can understand why it's well revered. It just felt, and maybe it was just an off week for me or something. Like it was an uphill battle for me to like stay consistently engaged with it and to find it compelling throughout. And maybe I think some of it kind of lands on understanding the story and like this, like the domestic squabble kind of thing. Like it felt a little hard to like feel too plugged into that. And I think some of it too, admittedly, is naivete on my behalf of like cultural things and understanding like character motivations. Or I feel like there are some instances with the dialogue where I was like, don't really understand what they're talking about or like what they're saying as far as their motivation is here. And I think that was a combination of maybe not mistranslation, but like lost in translation being Japanese, but then also being historic Japanese, that it's, they didn't talk the same, just like Americans didn't talk the same 200 years ago, or Europeans didn't talk the same 200 years ago. So there's a lot of little things that I feel like made it a struggle for me. But there was definitely like points in the story that I feel like I got more interested and found it more compelling. I did also love like the makeup effects, and on Hidetora, like when he went batshit crazy and looked like, just how ghoulish they made him look and how undead they made him look. Like, I thought that was really kind of affecting and intense. But I mean, also just like, what a shitty family. Like, what a bunch of shitty sons and kind of a shitty dad. Because it kind of seemed like, he decides to, I'm going to give it up to you guys and then I'm going to do my thing. And then starts doing his thing. And he's like, well, wait, no, I still want to have control over that. And they're like, well, you kind of gave it all up to us, Dad. But then they decide they need to kill it. Like, yeah, there's a lot of rambling for me to say. Like, I don't want to say I didn't get it. I think I got it, but I didn't love it. But yeah, I don't know. I also have kind of given thought in the last few weeks of like, would I rewatch this? I'm sure I would, not necessarily like tomorrow, but like I'd almost be more interested in rewatching this with somebody else who's really interested in watching it, whether or not it's their first time viewing. And I definitely think I would compel myself to watch it in one sitting to see if that kind of affects my thoughts and interpretation of it as well.
We'll get a movie night going on sometime, Dustin, because I would watch this any day of the week.
Okay, all right.
If you haven't watched too much Kurosawa, my favorite of his is Yojimbo, which shares a lot of connections with A Fistful of Dollars and that character. Anyway, but to go to Ron, yeah, I mean, I remember liking this movie a lot more when I was younger and I watched it for the first time, and maybe that was just where it was positioned in my history of watching movies. But I felt the length in this viewing more than I don't remember that actually being a part of it at all when I watched it before, and so I felt the length this time in a way that it did kind of drag on a little bit. I will legitimately say that and I think I texted you guys, this, in the last couple of weeks. The existence of Shogun, the show on Hulu right now, that I have gone head over heels for, and made this. I think I was more intrigued in the nuances of like feudal Japan and the culture there when I had not had any experience with it at all. And it isn't to say that I've done any research or know much more beyond watching and reading Shogun since it's come out, but there were times when it kind of informed what was going on in a way that I appreciated. In the like when you're saying, Dustin, that they kind of reject this idea that he can pull back on the power that he's given away, and reverse it a little bit because he gave it away, and that's kind of the way that it works. And seemingly, anyway, from what I can glean from how feudal Japan works, it's like this very interesting game of rules that everyone kind of follows in a very rigid manner that leads to very interesting decisions and also leads to very interesting attempts to exact influence in a situation because of your position in society. But yeah, it was, however, because Shogun does that in a much more intimate way with a lot more explanation and a lot more kind of like diverse characters, it was difficult to get that from Ron like I did in the past. And that is it's a very weird place to be in, and a very like time and place of watching this. I mean, I legitimately feel like we watched Ron in the first episode that we did, and I had not yet engaged with this show that I would have almost a completely different viewing. Now, in terms of the use of color, the first scenes, and I would be shocked, and maybe someone can look this up while I'm talking or whatever, but I do think this was Kurosawa's first foray into color. Everything else he does is black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And that first scene really felt like someone who had been given a new tool to express things visually really running wild with it and enjoying the hell out of it with all those colors and all those landscapes. And I guess I looked at the use of color in this, in a lot of just the war scenes and the battle scenes, and how so much of that history, so much of any history, is just people dressing up in different colors and deciding to war on someone else who's wearing a different color, and how that is such a part of this world of loyalty, and this is who we're with, and this is who we're backing, and we all wear these brilliant colors into this horrible, dirty, disastrous war situation, and warring with each other. So I liked it. I appreciated it. It made me want to watch other Kurosawas again, and some of the early ones, just to, I don't know, re-engage with all his work. And it made me research some history of Kurosawa, because he has a very bizarre personality. He's a very intense personality when it comes to his history with film and doing it in Japan and doing it when he did it. And so that, in that sense, I think that to me is kind of a lot of what I like to get out of a movie is, does it stoke my interest in the movie or something else beyond? And I think the best movies for me stoke my interest in the movie itself and the beyond and the behind the scenes and like historical stuff. And just, I want to know more about the actors, the directors, all the things. And so it did do that. I did really appreciate the filmmaking, and it has that crazy makeup and stuff. There's all sorts of historical context there that Kurosawa was going after and pulling from. There is an aspect of the plot where you're just like, man, why are you all so dumb? Why are you doing this? And I felt like maybe I didn't have the explanation there that I wanted, especially given 2 hours and 35 minutes or something of runtime on this. Like, it was pretty long. And I was like, there was more that could have been done there, but
I think that was maybe like part of where I kind of got lost with the plot of just like understanding the time and era, and like there wasn't, a phone to pick up, but like stuff that's like, if you guys just talked a little bit, just, said a couple more words, maybe we could avoid some of this stuff. Like, just some of that kind of caught me. To answer your question about, it was not Kurosawa's, or did I say that right this time?
Kurosawa, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, okay.
It was not his first.
It was not his first. You were way off. His first color film was, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it was in 1970.
Okay,
so 15 years
so
prior
full 15
to this.
years before. Wow, yeah.
So he did that and then went back and did other black and whites. And it's interesting. I mean, I also, when you were talking about Suspiria and color and its relation to the other two films we watched, there is a part of me that I think it's interesting. And I think it would have been, I'm not 100% sure I believe what I'm about to say for Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but if you gave me Portrait of a Lady on Fire and Ron in full black and white, I think I would still get a lot out of those movies. And if you gave me Suspiria in black and white, I would get literally nothing.
Yeah.
So
I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Like the color is there. It's a great, wonderful element of the film, but I don't feel like, and my gut, like my instinct is to say, like, I don't feel like it really drives the story of the movie, but that's not what it really does in Suspiria. It drives the atmosphere, I feel like, in Suspiria exceptionally well. And not that it doesn't impact the atmosphere in these other two, but it just doesn't. There's enough other pros to these other two and enough other things going on that the color palette doesn't need to carry the same amount of weight in terms of keeping my interest and making it worthwhile to me.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting that, that both you guys have talked about the characters and finding some things to latch onto, but not others. I think for me, Hidetora's story was really the through line, and the emotional kind of heart of the movie is his descent into madness and the tragedy of that it could have been resolved by having some heartfelt face-to-face conversations. the whole reason that he flees to the third castle that's eventually besieged by sons 1 and 2, where they have the red and yellow armies on both sides, is because he's too proud to go to Saburo and apologize and, kind of take refuge with him. His shame is too profound for him to go to his third son, who actually knows him and accepts him. Um, so he, retreats to this castle where he's then attacked. Um, and I think the makeup, helped me connect to that, Dustin. Like the way they really make him look so like, ghoulish and decaying. Um, they externalize his crumbling mental state in a way that's really powerful. Um, I thought it was very sad how he has these moments of lucidity where among his ramblings he'll suddenly get like a flash where he's like, what have I done? My sons are all warring and killing each other. Or when he gets remorse for the crimes that he committed when he was a young warlord. And you have those really, again, tragic side characters like the young blind man, whose village he raided when he was younger, and the sister of the blind man who's become like a Buddhist and is abstaining all violence. I don't know. I just thought those threads were all really rich, and I thought the visuals, just told the story without needing kind of expository dialogue or without needing characters to, you know, pontificate with each other, even though there's quite a lot of pontificating in this movie. It mostly comes from the fool character, who I also really liked and thought that was a great performance.
Yeah, I did like it.
Yeah, so a lot of rambling thoughts by me there, but I think, um, looking at Hidatora as the emotional anchor for the movie, um, I think it's part of why it was such a deep experience for me, both the first time I saw it in theaters at the Oriental, and then on this rewatch. Um, and yeah, I also just loved how color was used on a practical level in terms of orienting you to what is happening with the conflicts. You had a good point, Kyle, about how this movie really underscores that warfare is people dressing up in, different attire and clashing, armies fighting, um, and it's these armies carrying blue bolts of cloth and yellow and red bolts of cloth. And I thought that helped you, visually just be able to differentiate which of the three sons you were seeing, gave a clarity and a weight to those big battle scenes. I think for me, the standout sequence happens when Hidatora is taking refuge in that third castle, and then sons 1 and 2 kind of attack it, and you have the red and yellow on either side of the frame. You've got his castle going up in flames, and as we were talking about, the lush green of the intro gives way to these kind of very muddy grays and browns, and I think that lets the other colors pop some more. I love that sequence of the arrows flying and Hidatora kind of retreating inside. His face is, totally ghostly pale white. And for me, the standout image of the movie, I have a little exercise I want us to do when we're ranking these movies at the end, but just to tease one of mine, my standout image here is Hidatora walking down the steps of the castle. It's in flames behind him, and you have the armies of his two sons kind of on either side of the frame. And I think that's the moment where he does really go crazy and really lose his mind, because he's lost both of his sons who have killed all of his men and, want to kill him and take his power.
I think, as we're talking about this, I'm realizing that perhaps the priming of the viewing with the idea uh, of how is color used, and kind of thinking about that, perhaps didn't didn't allow me to engage with some of those elements that you just. I'm trying to think about why this was such an affecting movie for me 10, 12 years ago, and why this viewing was not as much. And I think it could be a little bit of that looking for color in a way that almost distracts me from really sitting with some of those, looking for color in scenes and how it's used, as opposed to really listening to and reading the dialogue and the character movements. It's kind of interesting to just to think how much the priming for a viewing, and I think about this when I go back to like the film classes I took, and what I'm supposed to be looking for when I watch these classic films, and how that can change my viewing of it in a way that is not just, hey, we're going to put on a story and there'll be some elements, and talk about it when you're done. So it's kind of curious. I wonder if that has a piece of that, because when you talk about all those elements of the story, Alex, like it resonates more than it did when I just watched it, which is bizarre, because it was such an affecting movie for me the first time that I saw it. So I'm just kind of wrestling with that. And I mean, if we want to segue to Portrait of a Lady, we can on that, because that was a movie where, like you said, Dustin, the second half was more. There was more of that in the second half, and in the first half, it wasn't super. I mean, there was certainly color involved, but it wasn't like it didn't seem like a big focus. It didn't seem a huge part of it in the way that it does for the other two movies. And then it gets there in the second half, but I almost, because of that lack, or because of it wasn't sort of an overwhelming or big in your face part of the movie, I was able to like engage with the characters. And really, I mean, I loved Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and just watching everything unfold. And I thought the characters and the performances were spectacular. It's too bad that one of those actresses or actors has decided to not be a part of film industry anymore, because it's a part of the system that's terrible and keeps everyone unequal, which I agree. But it's just too bad that we don't get to see her on screen anymore, because she was wonderful.
I'll have to do some more digging into that. I had no idea about any of that behind the scenes drama.
Yeah, I mean,
Eloise, that actress, who is actually, I don't know if they're married or not, but is partners with the director of the film as well.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I just the scene where they're painting. I mean, every scene where they're painting, I think, is great. And scenes where they're painting she's recreating the abortion to really. I don't know. That was a very powerful scene where they're all doing that together after it's done, as a way to help that maid kind of process that with them in this supporting way. And how it was a person who didn't want to be painted, and how that's kind of everything of that era, portraiture, and that this is this woman's the whole career. She goes around and paints people. And I mean, I just thought it was I also, I mean, and maybe it's just being naive and just enjoying a story, but it took me a while to be like, oh, they're going to get together, and that's what's going to happen. And so I kind of was a little bit, maybe 10, 15 minutes late to that building, and that was a nice part of the viewing for me of, oh, we're going here. This is where this is going, and how that I thought was well earned because of that. Like, it was very subtle in kind of how it executed a lot of what it was trying to do. I loved I also just loved how that character of the maid was kind of a big part of the storyline for them, for her. Like, it wasn't just a complete side thing.
Yeah.
And the dialogue, the writing, the acting, all those composition shots, like you say, I mean, where they're doing the painting and they have the dress and they're against the windows and the light backgrounds. And I mean, it was a gorgeous film. And then the ending was very affecting.
Yeah, that final scene of her. I went back and rewatched that like 3 times.
Yeah.
It's beautiful and heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And I mean, in a way that like the little homage in the portrait that she allows with the page number, that's wonderful, and that's an Easter egg. But to have the ability to like voyeuristically for that character to be able to watch her expression of that love that can't be because of the way the world is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, yeah. Just thinking about it was just so.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm getting
so
misty too. Just thinking about it, it was beautifully done.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, just how long they held on her, and like you can really see her reliving that time as she listens to that music, and like emotionally the ups and downs, like the facial expressions, all of that. I feel like on a lighter note, there's two things that I want to point out. One, I mean, I think those two kind of codas at the end of the 2 times that she saw her again, the painting and seeing that 28 as kind of an Easter egg for her and a message really only to her lover. Right. And then her seeing her at that show are the most affecting parts of the movie, and like it wouldn't be as impactful as it is were it not for those 2 scenes. I do feel like the sloppy's not the right word. Lazy comes to mind of like the narrative structure that they use to tell those 2 beats of her just suddenly narrating them to no one seems weird to me, given the structure they set up of her opening and closing as a teacher teaching students. Like, I would have thought that they could have more easily, recognizing the issues of her telling her students about this affair she had with this experience she had with another woman would probably not be appropriate, but like it would have been more affecting to me if she was telling this story to someone, or even just journaling it herself or something. The framing of her being in teaching her students feels inconsequential after you see the end of it, because they just go to this random narration that seems kind of jarring. The other thing, on a much, much lighter note, the thing I thought of watching this when I started it, she says the name of the movie in like the first 2 minutes when the student pulls out the painting and what's it called. It always makes me think of, there's this great YouTube video of like, what would happen if a movie ended when a character says the name of the movie? And I'll have to send it to you guys, and maybe I'll splice it in here. Like, my favorite one is Black Hawk Down, because there's like 6 or 7 different movies they do. In Black Hawk Down, it's like halfway through the movie and Black Hawk crashes, and there's someone on the radio going, "We got Black Hawk Down, we got Black Hawk Down," and then it cuts to the credits, and Phil Collins' Susu Studio starts playing. And so that's the first thing I thought of when she says the name of the movie. Is I'm like, oh, it'd be kind of funny if it just like ended right here. But yeah, I absolutely loved this. I loved the intimacy of the setting. I was thinking about that this morning, of how, when they're outside on the beach, you get this beautiful vista of them being outside, but everything inside, ostensibly they're in a pretty big mansion of some sort, but it's all tight shots. You never get to see like the full expanse of any room they're in. I think of when they are eating or playing cards with the maid, and that almost looks like it was like on a simple sound stage, like a TV set or something, because some of those scenes you see the fireplace hearth behind them, and the 3 of them are working on the table, and that's it. But it really added to the intimacy of it and the closeness of it. Excuse me. And yeah, I just felt you could really feel that relationship blossoming and being earned, and I think both of those leads did a phenomenal job of like making you feel that like that they genuinely loved each other and that there was like no question in either of their minds. And it also made me think of, have either of you seen Atonement?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't watched Atonement since, like, I think it came out in 2007. I probably rewatched it in like 2010. But I remember watching that with a girl I was dating in college and being like kind of emotionally broken by that at the end. And the spoiler for that is that like the love story reuniting is fiction. And he died in the war and everything. And like, I feel like I kind of had a similar feeling coming out of this, of like that kind of doomed romance that you spend the whole movie like watching as it's being earned and deserved, and then you kind of get that crush at the end of like it can never be held on to, kind of a thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I love what you were saying, Dustin, about the framing being so tight and close, where there aren't a lot of wide shots, and it really helps sell that intimacy. Um, there's also not a lot of camera movement in this, where there's a lot of static shots where the camera just really lingers on an image, and um, I think it sells the patience of this relationship. It's really a relationship that's built, you see it being built over time, over these kind of stolen glances that happen during these interactions, whether they're walking on the beach, when that's their dynamic, and it's those earlier scenes, or during the later painting scenes. And you really just get to feel the characters' internal states by how they're looking at each other. And the film crit 101 reading of this movie is, as I was telling Dustin, today, it's all about like the female gaze. But I really do think that's an illuminating way to look at it, because it's really about, you know, stolen glances, and when you see someone and when you let yourself be seen, which I think is why that ending scene is so powerful, because it is voyeuristic. Marianne is watching Heloise kind of without Heloise realizing it, so you get to see the full spectrum of emotions play out on her face. Um, and yeah, I loved that part of it, and I loved the patience in the filmmaking that let us see this relationship blossom, um, because it adds to the poignance and the tragedy, because as you guys are saying, you're rooting for it so hard. These people deserve to be together, and I almost ended the movie like kind of raging at the world that like they couldn't be together in the patriarchal confines of 1800s European society, or any society at that time period. But yeah, it really lets you sit with the characters, see the emotions on their faces, and um, I think it just lets uh, the emotions hit that much harder when a film respects its audience and lets them linger with those shots.
Yeah, it's again, like this was kind of like I said in the beginning. Um, it was a movie that I watched and I was like, what else has this person done? Because I would like to watch all of those movies, because I'm just curious as to what they've been able to do in their other films when they've tackled other pieces. And is it going to be more of this, or is it going to be something a little different? Like it just made me really want to watch more of Skiyama. Is that how you say it? Skiyama. Yeah, I think so. Or Skiyama, yeah, Skiyama's work. And yeah, there's not that much of it. So anytime that a movie stokes that out of me, I just think it's definitely something that's how I respond to it. It's just like I want to learn and know more. And it was cool to see. They didn't do too much on the actual like mechanics of painting, but they did some. And it gave a good. I think you go to museums where you see these old paintings and a lot of portraits, and you'd be very quick to look at them and say this is boring, or this is just of a time and place and it's not interesting. But I think the more an experience I had this year when I went to Amsterdam and I actually found myself doing the Rembrandt's house tour, and they go through how he lived and his studio and how he made paints and so it allowed me to see behind the mechanics of why what he produced was interesting for a time and push things forward. And it's a whole bunch of information that you just don't have when all you see is a portrait. And I think this was kind of cool to see that in a story, and to see like, oh, this person didn't want their portrait done, and it took this story to allow it to happen, and to have this character evolve in many ways, both characters really. But the kind of, I think it's just because of our relationship to the photograph now, I think it's easy to look at portraiture and be like, oh, it's with paint, but we just took a click. And to get like a tortured story of the actual creation of a painting, and also her being like, yeah, this one sucks. We're done with this one. We're throwing this away. I brought 2 canvases, burn this one. It sucks. Was a bit like, I appreciated that from the artist side of it, and just the story that led to the creation of a painting that is, I think I have been very quick to dismiss when I've seen these things, and it just makes me more interested about the stories behind them all and why certain things are the way they are in them, because it all has this weird meaning that you just don't get access to. Yeah, and then and I just wanted to give a shout out to the opening scene that I thought was a very the kind of uneasiness and just the literal shaky ground as that boat is going up and down and all over the place, and how there's a wave and the things get knocked in and she has to go in and get her paintings, and how important that is. Like she doesn't even bat an eye at jumping into the ocean to get those 2 canvases.
Yeah, that's a great call.
And like, just, yeah, that's so much of what she does, compared to someone who just like takes some pictures. Not that there isn't craft in that anymore, but it just is a completely different relationship to what you're doing. And how she did throw that one away and all she had was 2. And yeah, just that I appreciated a lot of that when it came to the actual creation of the painting itself, and how it made a portrait interesting. And then I love the scene where she is on fire and they are with all those women, and similar to like what you said about women getting together in Suspiria, and how it's maybe saying some things about that, Alex. This was kind of the reverse of how that support system can be so incredibly important for a person's development.
Right.
So all those things. But yeah, it's in a complete opposite to Suspiria, the opening scene for this with the class, and then to the boat scene. And I love how she just walks, like the guy's like, I don't know, go walk over there, take your canvases and just walk up the hill. It was just like a lot of you're not supported in this world from there, and it's very uneasy. And to find that rock in the other character, and then in the maid, and then in that little scene with the women all together at the fire. So just so good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love what you said about getting to see the creation of a painting. I thought it was really fun as viewers that you could see that first painting of Heloise and just in an instant be like, nope, that's wrong. She didn't get it at all. And, I don't know anything about like art theory in the way that would let me analyze a portrait from that time period. But just from seeing the characters interact, from what we've been shown as viewers, you can agree with the other characters that like, nope, she did not capture her in that first attempt at all. I get why she destroyed it. Is a cool way to like visually show what the characters are going through.
Yeah.
I agree with all that. I don't have anything to add. I think, it was, every bit of this was interesting and emotionally affecting, and where maybe it did not drag in the first half by any means. It took kind of some like deliberate slow plotting, and I didn't know exactly how it was going to come to fruition. But by the time you get into the second half, I feel like it kind of completely delivers on everything it's setting up and emotionally like reverberates in a way that I completely didn't expect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, Alex, you had a thing where we're trying to rank these movies, and I think you wanted us to talk about scenes or shots that we like. Tell me what your idea was there when we can get into the rankings.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love us to do a fun little dorky exercise where we rank our movies, and as we rank them, I want you all, and I'll do it too, to close your eyes, think of one image from each movie, and then tell me what that image is and what colors you see when you think of that movie and that shot.
Oh
And I can
man,
kick us off because this is my idea, so I've had time to actually think about it. Um, so I would put Suspiria as my number three, and I still really dug Suspiria. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 on Letterboxd, and I think that resonates with my enthusiasm for it. But definitely had thought it was a little thinly drawn. It was mostly an audiovisual experience as we're talking about. But when I close my eyes and think of Suspiria, I see that scene I was talking about where um, the curtains are drawn and we're seeing the red and we're seeing that silhouette of Helena Marcos, the head witch, and she's like breathing and it's you know it sounds like a corpse like rattling and I just see that ghoulish red with her silhouette, and that's the most striking image there. Um, Number two for me is probably Portrait of a Lady on Fire because of how much I love Ron. Um, and for this one, um, I think what really sticks with me is that first scene on the beach that you were talking about, Kyle, right after she retrieves the painting. And something about that pink sky where it just totally took my breath away. And whenever I think about this movie, there's lots of images that are going to come to mind, but um, something about that shot of Marianne, you know, walking along the beach with her canvas and that pink sunset in the background, that really strikes a chord. Um, my number one is Ron, and my image and color that go along with it um, are again that scene I described where it's at the third castle. Hidatora is descending the steps. You've got like the gray kind of mountains behind him, and behind the castle, you've got the castle in the orange embers and flames, and you've got the red and yellow bannermen on either side as Hidatora is losing his mind and walking down these descending steps. Um, so those are my 3, 2, 1, and those are my three images and colors that come to mind. Kyle, what
yeah,
about you? Take us through it.
uh, yeah. I mean, number three for me is Suspiria, and it is the stabbing scene because that's all I think about, and it is the green behind her. That because it's just it adds to the psychedelic whatever you want to call it, where you know what I mean. And that's not to continue to talk about Zodiac, but I think those two scenes are so intimate. Like there's no way that director wasn't thinking about that or influenced by that in some way. But that scene happens with just like nothingness, like muted colors, like white shirts, black coats. Just it's not nothing pops color wise there. But the green in Suspiria, and it's number three for me, which I don't think is a shock to anyone. But number two for me is Ron, and the scene that I think about is actually more of just a shot, and it's kind of before everything hits the fan. But there's a shot where Herodota is at the top of the shot, and then everyone is fanned out to the side in all their colors, in this like perfect. We've gone into the wilderness, but we set up these little areas that we do our official business in, and the way that everyone is sitting there, not the one where where you see the three brothers and their colors, but it's like this they're fanned out in this way that's just so orderly. And then that order is obviously annihilated through the rest of the movie. That's the one that I think of. That, and the first time that I saw it, and then the second time on this viewing that it came out, I was like, like it sticks with me. And just because it's still green as well, like there's still a lot of green in that shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the other one is when Saburo, when he falls asleep in the beginning, like, and he puts that little green shade over him. I also think of that with the yellow surroundings.
Yeah,
in
that's
that
a great moment
in that square, because it's such a like touching moment for where the movie goes, which is killing your father or going after it, or not if you're Saburo. But yeah, and then Portrait of a Lady on Fire. It's tricky. I think that's the one that I have maybe the hardest time thinking of one. And it's also, and I think one of the reasons I'm having trouble thinking of the hardest is because the scene I think that is obvious is when she shows up in the green dress for the first time, and she's committed. Heloise is committed to being painted. Like she's given that part up, and she shows up in that green dress, which is such a, I mean, she's giving herself over to the painting of herself, but it really is more, it's like this very big step in their relationship. And it's the beginning of it becoming very intimate, I feel like. And I don't know, that's kind of where it really, it's almost like she's not doing it for herself, Heloise, or she's not doing it for her mom. She's doing it for her soon-to-be lover. So yeah, that I think that's the scene. And yeah, Portrait of a Lady on Fire is the one that I'm like recommending to people all over the place now. So that's definitely my number one.
Hell yeah, I love that. Dustin, what about you? What are your 3, 2, 1s, and what are your scenes, colors that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I would say 3 would be Ron. I think when I think of like visually, it's not really like the moments that come to me aren't really like because of the colors, but the colors are a big factor of it, and it's really like any of those initial sequences in the beginning where the they're showing the men in the countryside amongst the rolling hills, and that juxtaposition of them standing or on their horses and the rolling green, lush greenness behind them, or in front of them rather, really kind of like sticks in my head. And like the placidness and the comfort of that, it serves as a big juxtaposition to like the chaos of the rest of the movie. Suspiria is my number 2, and for that it's really like the visual kind of chaos of the coloring in that initial, sorry, my dog's in here playing, but we'll just have to let that go. The initial kind of chaos of that first kill, and when specifically when the girl dies and she's dead and her body gets pushed through the plate glass in the ceiling, and her roommate runs down to the room, or like to the foyer of the apartment building below her, and there's all these like jagged geometric shapes and colors and palette changes and things like that. These are more like GIFs than still imagery that kind of appears in my head. But I think like there's just so many different like visceral hits of color in that scene. And then 1 would be Portrait of a Lady on Fire. And actually for me, it's picturing the final moments of the movie when the camera's just fixated on Eloise and you're seeing her emotions kind of run through her. And in my head, I see her in the green dress in a very muted color, but I'm pretty sure she's not wearing the green dress. But that just kind of speaks to the impact of the green dress. But just, yeah, that emotional, visceral scene is kind of what I think is going to sit with me for a long time with that movie.
Yeah. What are we doing next?
I think you're up next, Kyle.
Yeah, do you
Oh.
want to give listeners a tease for what you're thinking?
Oh yeah, I wanna get to Eternal Sunshine. I wanna do part two
Okay.
of those coming of age tales.
I love it.
Which I now have to look up to see what part two was. But I know it was Eternal Sunshine. Oh yeah, no, hold on. We're gonna have to edit some of this out. But it was Eternal Sunshine, and I want to say Dustin hadn't seen any of them.
That sounds right.
That sounds right. Okay. I get so much slack for having never seen Eternal Sunshine. Okay.
I got it here.
Okay, what do you got? Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Part 2, you've got Persepolis, Boy,
Okay.
and Eternal Sunshine.
Okay, sweet. Yes, that's amazing. I've not so yeah, those are the three. I've not seen Boy. That's Taika Waititi.
Okay.
Which and I think there's maybe a little autobiographical stuff in there with him. Eternal Sunshine, just to watch it again. I haven't seen it in a long time. Very curious to show it to someone for the first time. It's amazing. And then Persepolis, which is an animated movie about a character's experience through the Iranian Revolution. So and one that I think is. I saw that in the theater, and I'm very happy I did. So anyway, that's the tease. More coming of age, and then one that a lot of people would say that's not a coming of age tale, which is that's great. I love that.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, it'll be a timely viewing of Eternal Sunshine. It is 20 years old now, which is absolutely crazy. It came out in 2004, so we'll be seeing it on its 20th anniversary-ish.
Well, I'm not shocked by that because I turn 40 years old tomorrow. So
well, happy early birthday, and
happy early birthday, man.
We'll catch all 0 of our interesters. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. We'll catch all 0 of our listeners on the flip side.
Yeah, we got one.
Okay, our one